Hi everybody. In this module, we're going to be looking at how we can actually export our textures out of Substance Painter and get them inside our game engine. In this case, Unreal 4, and using the scene that we had previously from our other courses. So let's get started. So what we've got here is our finished texture. Everything's set up the way that we want. Everything's looking the way that we want. We just need to kind of put this into a game engine now. So how do we do that? Well, the main thing is we just need to export. So if you just go up to File, Export Textures, or use Control-Shift+E, you can actually get that. So just export textures. So what we've got here is our exporting process. There's a number of different kinds of things that we can export, and you'll see here our default material is the texture that we've got right now. Now, we could actually export this at a larger resolution as well. We don't necessarily need to export at the resolution our document size is set to. We could even export at a lower resolution. All of those are possible, and you can certainly try that out, but for now, we'll stick with what we've got. Now, I do have a number of different kinds of categories I can work with, configurations that are set up to work well for different kinds of exports. Basically, it'll take the maps that I have and export them to the appropriate kinds of channels that are expected. So, for example, if I were to pick Dota 2, a number of the things that I would need would not actually export because my channels are just not set up that way. My template, the first thing I did when I started Painter, was not set up properly. But for example, for things like PBR Metal Rough, I will be able to export for this. So if I just open this up, you'll see what we're getting here. We're basically going to get a base color export, a roughness export, a metallic, a normal, a height, and an emissive if you happen to have it. So that works out pretty darn well. That's pretty much exactly what we're going to need. But you'll find if we actually scroll through this further, you'll see things like Unity 4, 5, and Unreal Engine 4, which is a packed version of the same thing. So if I were to, for example, click that, you'll see I actually have less information in here, but some stuff that's pretty darn useful, such as occlusion and roughness and metallic, which is what I want anyways. But they're all just one texture. So what is that? Well, let's just pop over to configuration here, and you can start to see what we're actually working with. If we go down to Unreal Engine 4, what you'll find is a few little pieces of information are here. So what we're actually seeing is basically each different kind of output map that we're going to be getting and the color associated with the object that's going to be going in and what that information is. So for example, you can see here that RGB is the color information that we're getting for base color. So we're getting the red, blue, and green channel. The name for it is going to be sort of this prefix of underscore mesh. So it's the mesh name, and then the name of your texture set, which our texture set is over here. And then it's just going to be called simply base color. So every time you see that little money symbol, that's basically going to be designating what this type of thing is. If you wanted to add one in, we could call it, basically name all this based off of the project name. So in this case, it would be END02 or END01, whatever it is that you're going to be working with. Now, in this case, we will leave this as is. We could remove some of it if we wanted to. But again, you'll just see over here, RGB is what we're getting for base color. So emissive, this color is down here, and it is RGB as well. So it's the full color range that we're getting. Normal, again, this sort of gray color here, if we look through, you'll see normal DirectX. That is what we're getting through here. Green, or rather purple color, is our metallic. So the blue channel of this map is going to be metallic. The green channel is going to be, as we can see here, roughness, and this lightest color is going to be in the red channel, and that is our mixed AO map. And so they're all going to be combined together when we export to go into a single map so that we only use a minimum number of actual textures to bring in, which will work pretty well for us. So let's actually do that and do an export. So basically, I just need to pick a location for this, which will work just fine. Let's just drop this into our final area here. Demos, without an E, of course. And let's just select this folder. And at this point, we can now just say export. It'll take a moment to kind of render through everything, export it, and give us actual padding in our export. And we can just open up that folder, and we can see here those final results. So this looks good. That looks like our base color map. This looks like our normal map. And this looks totally crazy because basically each channel has specific information in it. So if this doesn't look like anything useful, well, it's fine. That actually doesn't matter. Let's close that up and let's open up Unreal 4 and start to drop these in. So here we are inside Unreal 4 with our previous project opened up. This has all of our different elements already existing in it that we'd made before, and we can now just start applying our textures onto them. So we just need to bring those in. Remember that you can actually just drag any of these textures straight into Unreal. Just wait for a moment until the cursor changes, let it go, and it'll just start importing them all in right away. So it takes a moment, and it tells you already that it's imported your normal as a normal map, and you can say OK. And there's one more thing that we'll want to do. Basically, by default, any of the kind of metalness maps and roughness maps that go into Unreal are going to be coming in a linear format. And what we want to do is make sure that we turn off sRGB. So just again, to show you how we get here, just double click this texture, scroll over here to sRGB in our texture settings, and turn it off. It'll take a minute for this to recompile inside of Unreal, and you'll be good to go. That will mean that you're going to start getting actual correct math happening for your roughness materials and getting an effect that you're actually looking for. So let's just modify one of our existing materials to get what we want out of this. So we can double click this and just start to move things around. So this and this we don't really need anymore. So I'm just going to delete them, get rid of them, don't need them. Drop this in, which is our normal map. Let's just drag the entire thing into our normal. Let's drop this in here and this as well. So we'll drop that into our base color, which is appropriate, but now we need to kind of remember which piece was which. If you're not sure, just quickly jump over to Substance and just press Control-Shift-E to open this back up, and we can look at what we have again here. So again, blue is metallic, green is roughness, and R is mixed AO. So again, you can just kind of remember those different elements and then just pop over to Unreal to get the kind of actual setup that we want. So metallic is in blue, green is roughness, and red is our ambient occlusion. If you want to see that broken down in here, just remember that you can just turn off any of these various layers, and you'll see this is our mixed AO, which is a little bit incorrect in this case, so that's not necessarily a good sign. Our green works out pretty well, and our blue is working out pretty darn well as well. So you can again see here, if you're not quite sure, they might be relatively obvious to figure out which is which. So that's basically going to work the way that we want, and the ambient occlusion is not quite the way that we wanted for export, but that's okay for the moment. Just press apply, and we should be able to see that on our mesh. There we go. So that works out pretty well, and we can just apply that material to both parts here and see our actual texture on this mesh the way it's supposed to be represented. And that's looking pretty darn convincing and pretty compelling in Engine right now. But I have to say, the one problem that we have is that that ambient occlusion was not showing up when it was supposed to. So what are we going to do about that? Well, that's pretty easy. Let's just jump back into Substance. So here we are inside Substance again, and we can see we've got a few things here. Now, mixed AO is the converted map that's being generated. And in this case, it's not really working the way that we want. It's not the actual result. So how do we get rid of it? Well, all we need to do is go over to this R and just say, you know what, clear channel. Now, what we could do is actually just bring in our mesh map ambient occlusion into that R channel, say gray, because if we drop it in as an A channel, it'll basically become our alpha, which is, it's not really what we want in this case. We could do it, but we don't need to in this case. Just say that, and then we could come back to export, export again, it'll go into the exact same location and give us precisely what we're looking for. So that's perfectly fine. Let's just jump back into Unreal. And now you can see we can just select these pieces again, right click, and say re-import. And basically what's going to happen is now, we'll just take a second here, everything will re-import and we'll be able to get back in now the red channel will actually have the ambient occlusion that we were starting with, which means we're going to get the proper kind of information on this bake. And if any ambient occlusion is going to show up here, we'll be able to see it, and it's going to look a lot better for it. Let's also just drop in a good old skylight in here to make sure this renders properly, and a reflection capture actor. Both these things will work out really well. If you're not sure how to use Unreal in this way, just make sure you jump back to the previous video that I was doing on creating game assets inside of 3D Studio Max, and that'll give you a better sense of how to use Unreal in this case. We already cover some of those topics in there, and that is going to work pretty well for us. Now, the last thing that we have is the fact that if I drop any of these other meshes back in this scene, such as this guy, unfortunately, we're still getting all this other material showing up on it, and we don't really need that anymore. We don't need necessarily two materials on this. We can re-export from Max, that's the best way, but for now, we can actually just delete this texture, and what's going to happen is it's going to point out to us that we've got all these other referenced objects referencing that material. That's a problem. So what we want to do is actually just replace that. So we're going to delete the asset and update the references to point to a new piece, which is our existing material. So let's replace the references. It'll replace all of them and delete the asset. And we'll just say save. And now what we've got is all of our assets are going to be using all of those appropriate textures, which is absolutely great for us. And this looks just the exact way that we wanted inside of Unreal, which is perfect for us. And now we can basically just make whatever we need with our textures working perfectly inside of Unreal. And so this is basically all of those assets kind of placed into a more of a logical kind of setup so that you get a little bit of something that looks like a full and complete scene, just kind of taking those elements and putting them off in the distance, adding some glowing pieces. If you look off to the side, none of it works. But again, the goal here is just to give you something that looks like a full and complete space in which the textures now show up and look appropriate and look really convincing inside of our game space. And that is all we need to do to be able to create convincing and believable textures inside of Substance. And this completes the journey that we've had over multiple modules and courses to try to get how to create a modular structure from beginning to end, from design to hard surface modeling, to sculpting, to actually creating the low poly assets and then texturing them and getting it all into a game engine. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy seeing more videos on Pluralsight.